Welcome to The Secrets of Success. By following the proven techniques of the guests who appear on this series, you'll learn that even successful people run into detours and failures, and how you can apply their success techniques to change your life.
You're now listening to the most unique show on radio, the show dedicated to making you a success. Annette Simmons says she wants you to find your power. Today, she'll tell us how. Annette, thanks for being with us today.
What a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And Annette, we're really honored because, as I said to you before the show, I read on your bio, your previous book was voted one of the top 100 business books of all time.
That I'm not sure it was voted, but CEO Reed produced a list back in the 2000s, and so far I haven't been bumped off the list.
So that's really amazing, and you deserve congratulations. Now, today we're talking about a book that you wrote called Drinking from a Different Well. And can you tell us what that book is about?
Well, storytelling has been my career, teaching stories, gathering stories. And I learned how to do research by asking people to tell true stories that took metaphors like a power struggle or a turf war and actually describe what happened. So I asked women and men, how powerful are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And of course, a lot of the women go, what do you mean by power? And I was like, I don't know. What do you mean by power? And so I was able to gather these stories. And it turns out that women tell stories about power that men don't. And I think it's useful to understand what it is that we're expecting from power that's different from the standard expectations of a competitive narrative.
So this is really different from certainly our typical show, but I know from going through the book, very, very interesting and kind of a wake-up call, because as I'm reading your book, I'm saying it's almost like the men are talking one language, yes, maybe French, and the women are talking Spanish, and there's a reason we can't understand each other. We just have a different language.
Yeah, and women have been afraid to say we're different and we see different things, just because that may mean that, we're not up to par. In a competitive narrative, consistency is considered to be a sign of quality. But in a collaborative narrative, consistency can be very unequal in the way that it treats people. Standardized solutions can't adapt to different situations. And so women's narratives tend to define problems by collecting maybe 5 or 6 different points of view. Actually, we're running 5 or 6 points of view all the time. That's why men consider us wishy-washy or too emotional. We're just not thinking. It's not that we're unfocused, not focused on, the ball. It's just that we're also concerned with, do the kids have snacks? Is our family okay? Is this morally right? Is it going to affect our grandchildren's future with climate change? And unfortunately, what happens is that we'll come up and say, you need to pay attention to this, and this. And for a competitive narrative, that seems like we're making it ambiguous. When in fact, what we're doing is we're trying to make it a more bigger picture. Including more points of view.
And did you ever come up with a definition that you liked of power after talking to all the people, or did you have one starting out?
The difference between men and women's narratives about power is embedded in what it is we expect power to do, who we expect it to serve. So collaborative narratives, and it's not just women, men have collaborative narratives too, but the expectation is it serves everyone. It attends to collective well-being as often as it does individual well-being. So power that is used to protect the collective looks different in action and rearranges priorities. And right now we have tended to lean on this whole idea of power over, which silences, alternative voices. It's a different method of defining the problem. It's a different method of implementing solutions. Solutions are cookie cutter. They're highly participative. They're very specific. The military twigged on this, 20 years ago when they started to talk about situational reasoning. And they're always, in behavioral scientists, military is pretty much always ahead. So they've started to make the logistical changes that we have to make if we're going to pursue collaborative narratives, at least as much as we do competitive narratives.
I think that's a very good definition, and I'm thinking while you're saying it, the person who's the principal of the school, he or she may have the power over the whole school to do things in the building, in the classroom. But if they get out on the basketball court, they may not have any power because they're just a terrible athlete. Nothing against them, but they don't have ability.
Well, let's just say that we have a female principal. The power is theoretically that she has is she can send out a memo that says everybody has to adhere to this dress code. So she has the power, technically, the authority to do that. But a female will tend to call all the teachers in to the teachers meeting and say, what do you think our dress code should be? And then it gets co-created. And people are much more likely to adhere to something that they weren't told to do. They were asked to invent. And so these different methodologies create solutions that feel fair to more people. And also, because of that, get implemented.
Now, I have a quote from your book, so I'm going to paraphrase it, but I think you said, as a child, it was always easy to distinguish male narratives from female narratives. What does that mean, and how does the child see the difference?
Well, I was born in 1961. And so when the family got together, and we had big family Thanksgivings, 30 people, at least, depending on who's out of jail, and so when I witnessed men talking, I noticed that they weren't listening to the women, and they were talking about specific things, sports, football, hunting. And then I would go into the kitchen, and the women were talking about, they were talking about the men, for number one, and often, like, how do we make it seem like it was his idea? They were talking about cooking and family and all the unpaid labor that women do. And so they weren't mixed. I could tell, I could go in and experience the men's narratives and experience the women's narratives, and they were very different. I'm not sure how well that is translated today, because everybody's on their phones, and there's algorithms that are controlling who hears what. And so for me, I felt like it was. Another thing is that the little boys would probably stay in the room with the men. They would go in and listen to the women maybe a little bit, decide that's boring, and then go back and talk to the men. And let me tell you that the men that I've talked to, when I discussed the idea that competitive narratives silence collaborative narratives, they said, yeah, but it's just so boring when everybody wins. Who wants to play that way? So the differences between men and women is not our competency or our cognitive ability. It's what we love most. And you can look at the different kinds of movies we love.
Fair enough. Yeah, definitely that. Now, I know from reading your book, you mentioned basically women like to integrate emotional reasoning, and men seem to always want to score. They want to know if it's 8-5 their favor, or if they need to score 8 more points to beat you, or whoever the common adversary is or opponent. Is that what this is all about?
It's well, if you look at our political situation right now, you have the thing about collaborative narratives is collaborative narratives can deal with paradox, because there aren't any single truths in the world. The big T truths in the world are about balancing two things, and specifically for our country right now is balancing safety and freedom. And so the competitive players act like this is a win-lose game. But in a collaborative narrative, what is apparent all the time, it's not a conflict, it's contrasting priorities. And so the real wisdom is dialing in between how do we manage, the right amount of safety and the right amount of freedom. And it's always going to be off. It's always going to be slightly this way or slightly that way. And right now with the competitive players, they act like if we climb down the tower of either safety or freedom, it doesn't matter which, and we walk towards the other side and try to have a conversation about doing both, we get treated like we are traitors, like we are turncoats. We get punished for that sort of thing. And so the application of collaborative narratives is something that I don't think we would have noticed we needed if the competitive narratives hadn't gone so far in creating extreme divides.
Now, Annette, before we go further, I'd like to let our audience know that they're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest today is Annette Simmons. Her book is Drinking from a Different Well. Annette, we're going to ask you where we can get the book and if there's a website where we can get more information.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. Drinking from a Different Well is on Amazon. You can get it an Audible and an ebook. I have also, it's also available through Ingram Spark. So if you want to support independent bookstores, you can just go to any bookstore and have them order it. They probably won't have it in stock, but they can order it. And my website is differentwell.com. And my email is Annette Simmons. And I always welcome people to interact.
And we'll ask you that again later in the show. So if someone didn't get it down, but the title of the book, so they know, is Drinking from a Different Well. So if you like what you're hearing or you want to read more, which we hope you do, get hold of that book. Who's right, the men or the women? Which narrative is the winner?
Exactly.
See, I'm a man asking that, so exactly. I'm looking, and you're grinning at me.
That's the impediment.
I just fell into your trap, didn't I?
It's just natural. It's the way that Americans think. Capitalism is economics, politics are all designed for a competitive narrative, and so it's just feels bizarre to think in a different way where we both win. And that's been discredited by winners who call anyone who listens a loser. It's just a different kind of win. You know,
I noticed that, and I thought, am I the one who's wrong? Or, what's going on here? So you bring out a lot of points that I read your book, and then as I'm walking later on or taking some quiet time, you've got me thinking of it, which is what a great author wants. And I'm thinking...
I used to run self-awareness workshops. My mentor taught me how to do that. And so this book is written as a self-awareness workshop. So I'm so glad you had the response. That's exactly what I was trying to do.
Now, male narratives, and again, I'm taking this right out of your book, tend to belittle the wisdom of the emotional reasoning. Is that what you're finding? And how do they do that? Because I think right in the beginning of your book, you told how a business cohort, when he didn't like something you mentioned, could kind of put you down.
Sexual harassment is not about sex. That story was, I was trying to get some statistics from one of who I thought was my colleague, and he considered me in competition. And so we withheld that information, and I was too stupid to know that he was doing it. And so I ran up to him Friday afternoon. He's getting ready with his entourage to go for drinks. And I said, Ian, tell me where are those statistics? I need to make the presentation on Monday. And he took his little keychain flashlight out, and then he shined it on my breast, left and right, until I was so severely humiliated that I literally couldn't speak. And they got on the elevator, and as the doors closed, I heard this uproar of laughter. And so what happens is that if you're trying to be collegial, the best way to shut a woman down, particularly a woman who has PTSD from past sexual abuse, is to humiliate her in some sort of sexual way. And my brain did not come back until 3 a.m. Because women have a freeze response. It's not just fight or flight. Back in caveman days, we couldn't afford to risk the relationship. When you've got 6 kids, you can only carry 2. So we had this evolutionary, sort of shutdown mechanism when we're in danger of losing a relationship that doesn't work to our advantage when we want to get our voice heard. So a lot of the women have been convinced that because we are looking at multiple points of view, we're multi-focused, but we get disparaged as being unfocused. Technically, I suppose you can say that's true. Unfocused means that we're focused on more than one priority. And if we buy into that, then we get embarrassed about sounding wishy-washy, which is what happens when you're taking a paradox and you're dealing with both safety and freedom, with both quality and quantity. You sound wishy-washy because you're traveling along a paradox that it tweaks a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. And if we get embarrassed about having this perspective instead of proud of it, then we stay silent, and you end up with the competitive narratives just building more and more extremism.
And I wonder how many people reading your book or hearing the show are saying to themselves, I did something like that. That seems to be in the extreme, the action of your coworker, but did something like that just to embarrass somebody or put them down a little bit, or I guess in your terms would be exercising some power over them because they would walk away, or maybe she was of a lesser position in that firm, so they didn't want to fight the boss, so to speak.
Yeah, status grinds the way stratified use of information. If you've got high status people that get to be always right and low status people that don't get listened to at all, it's not really going to help you see a bigger picture. And so what competitive players tend to do, actually my first book was called Territorial Games. And I asked people to tell me stories, and strategic noncompliance, which is, sure, we'll do that. And you're thinking, no, you won't, but you don't have the guts to say, you're lying through your teeth, which probably is not going to be a good strategy anyway. There are other strategies to deal with that. But shunning is one of the things that people do to silence, alternative voices. And so as a woman, what I had to learn is to not flip out, because I tend to flip more into anger or just freeze. So either shut down or I flip out. And if I flip out when somebody's trying to belittle me, then I look like the crazy person. I've learned, and there's this one example I love, this. I was working with a group from the Pentagon, and this 2-star general just screamed across the room, "Why don't you just grow up?" to this female lieutenant colonel. And she's my role model. She leaned forward and she goes, "I don't mean to be disrespectful, but could you be more specific?" It was like, I want to be you. So a lot of the book is about how to deal with this intimidation and disdain and not get hooked, but keep speaking. And
I think that's, first of all, it makes us think of something like that rather than it just hits us one day on, as in your case, on an elevator or in a business hall or meeting, and also kind of prepares us for it, the after, I don't want to say after party, it's not a party certainly, but the after effect and how we would, could, or should react or want to when it happens. So you definitely have a lot of interesting stories in there, and the kind, as I said, that brings out the thought process. Annette, before we go further, again, I want our audience to know you're listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan. Our guest is Annette Simmons. Her book is Drinking from a Different Well. And Annette, again, can you tell us where we can get the book and the website?
Yeah, and I'll give you the subtitle to the book. It's Drinking from a Different Well, How Women's Stories Change What Power Means in Action. You can get it on Amazon. You can Audible. I narrated it myself. There's also, you can order it from an independent bookstore. It's available everywhere. And the website that I've set up just for this conversation is called differentwell.com.
Easy enough to remember. And again, as always, we will give you that information to our audience one more time before the end of the show if you want to get it down. You mentioned that men always seem to be more into metrics and measuring things. I guess the size of their muscles, the score, as you say, of the game, who's the best salesperson. I'm guessing this. Maybe you can tell me if I'm correct. Who earns the most? Who won the contest?
I would say that, and of course, gender isn't binary. I can sometimes think in a masculine frame of mind as well as a feminine frame of mind, but the difference between what men are seeking, what it is they want, is an idea of ranking, an idea of where they stand in the status. And of course, status is such an important, part of evolution. It's you end up with better food, with better partners, all that sort of stuff. But it's not enough by itself. And so women are seeking, in general, across the board, relationships. And so there are times when trying to improve your ranking can actually destroy relationships. And there are times when women on purpose disregard status and create a more equal conversation just to take care of the relationship. And so it's this back and forth between both. It's not that ranking is, stupid and we don't need to do it. It's that both preferences, this objective as well as this subjective point of view, bring a much richer well of wisdom for solving the big problems we have, like climate change and the political divide that we have.
You mentioned the terms and that they're different: power over and power with. What does that mean, and where does that come into the picture?
Well, if you think about how we define the problem, if you have a person who is concerned with power over, he actually walks into the staff meeting knowing what he thinks the problem is, and will tend to try to convince everybody else in that staff meeting that this is the problem we're here to solve, and so let's get about trying to figure out what the solutions are. Power with defines a problem by walking into a room saying, I have no idea what's going on. Here's what I see from my point of view. What does everybody else see from their point of view? And it takes more time up front, but then you end up collectively defining what the problem is. And it's usually a bigger picture. I always refer to the old Sufi story about the 5 blind men, each having a different hold of a different piece of the elephant and disagreeing, just being so angry at each other. An elephant is wide and flat, like, and leathery. No, an elephant is like a column. It touches the ground. And they could argue till the cows come home. But it's not until they take a little field trip of a different point of view that all of a sudden they begin to realize they have different parts of a much bigger picture. And so power with starts with problem defining being a collaborative process instead of a directed process.
When we talk about the men and the women, I think you mentioned that the men tend to distance themselves from unpleasant emotions. And
God bless y'all. Y'all can compartmentalize, in ways that we wish we could. I think it's. I heard some comedian talking about a man's brain has boxes, and none of the boxes mix. There's like, this is work and this is home. Well, a woman's brain, and again, we're overgeneralizing, will tend to balance the two. So managing work and home is not a sequence of managing one and then the other. It's about managing both at the same time. And so it means that we define problems differently and we come up with different solutions.
So if I was going to drop a bomb, it wouldn't matter too much to the men. I'm, again, oversimplifying, but their answer would be, well, we might lose 100,000 lives. And the women probably say, that's a lot of people who are hurt, in pain, or damaged. Am I kind of getting it correctly?
Right. And that you zeroed in on the number one factor, I think, that I've discovered after doing all this research is that women prioritize harm avoidance more often. In a competitive narrative, harm is simply the cost of doing business. The old quote, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. This is a coercive metaphor that makes you think that's just the cost of doing business. But that metaphor was originally used during the French Renaissance, the French Revolution, to justify murder. And so we have to be careful when harm is considered just the cost of doing business instead of a moral responsibility to do less harm. Do well, but not so well that you're harming others. There's a phrase that's come about with to describe our economy right now, and it's that we have so many people that have been replaced by machines that these people are now create what gets treated like a useless class. They're not valuable to capitalism, and therefore they don't count. So this is a problem we need to look at with more detail.
When you talk about the harm that comes with everything, I just wrote a note to myself. Harm is okay so long as it's not involving me. If I'm not going to get blown up right. or hit by that car, well, cars are good. And the fact that they might kill a few people each year, or cigarettes are good. And yeah, some people are going to die from them and get cancer. But, we like to smoke them, so that's all right. And then they usually compare them to something else and say...
It requires that you devalue empathy if you're going to be a highly competitive player. You can't feel sorry for the losers. And that gets elevated as, a talent for some people. But moral emotions were developed by evolution to force us, whether it's in our best interest or not, to think about what's in the best interest of the collective. Guilt, shame, generosity. These are moral emotions that cause us to act contrary to what the, win at all costs sort of ethic might convince us to do. And that's why we end up being marginalized because highly competitive players, certainly the people who are winning billions and billions and billions, don't want to change. And they don't have to. But what I've learned in my facilitation of impasse situations, usually people bring me in when they're about to, split, is that invariably, if there are 30 people in the room, there are usually only about 3 people who are stirring the pot, who are throwing the accusations, who are trying to divide, trying to sow seeds of disdain. And that leaves 27 people who actually want to do good. And I think America is a good representation of that percentage. I think 10%.
I think you've said it all today, and I think our listeners now want to get hold of Drinking from a Different Well by our guest, Annette Simmons. Annette, give us just that website real quick again.
differentwell.com.
Easy enough. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'd like to remind our audience that you've been listening to The Secrets of Success on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC. I'm your host, Bill Horan, asking you to please join us again next week at the same time when we'll continue our journey to success.